The first time I saw Adrian Wolfe, he was standing at the top of the ballroom staircase with a glass of whiskey in one hand and the entire room watching his every move. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense, his face was all harsh lines and unreadable shadows, but there was a gravity to him. A dangerous sort of pull. And I knew right then that he wasn't the kind of man you flirted with for sport. You aligned with him, or you became his casualty. I didn't expect him to approach me. I was tucked in a corner, swirling my champagne and watching my ex, Marcus Vale, make his usual rounds. Charming. Calculated. Smiling just enough to seem human. He always was good at keeping up appearances. Especially when he was lying through his teeth. Miss Alara Quinn. His voice was low, British educated and sharp. I turned. Adrian stood beside me now, eyes dark and steady, watching me the way predators observe terrain before a storm. I've been told you don't attend these events often. I don't. But tonight, I needed to be reminded of why I stopped. His mouth curved just slightly. I assume that has something to do with Marcus? I sipped my drink. You assume correctly. Good. I blinked at him. Good? He looked out over the crowd. I want to make him bleed. It was the way he said it. Not with rage. Not with desperation. With strategy. With purpose. Adrian Wolfe wasn't just a rival. He was Marcus's worst-case scenario in a tailored suit. And apparently, I was part of his blueprint. I'm listening, I said carefully. He turned to me fully now. A fake engagement. Public. Controlled. Mutually beneficial. I should have laughed. I should have asked him if this was some elaborate joke. But something about the glint in his eye told me this was very real, and very serious. You think Marcus will care? I asked. He'll care when he realizes he can't touch you anymore. That the woman he thought he could discard is now standing beside the one man who can dismantle his kingdom piece by piece. His words shouldn't have stirred anything in me. But they did. I set down my glass. And what do I get? You want revenge, Miss Quinn. I'm offering you power. The next morning, the press exploded. Engagement announcement, Wolfe and Quinn, business tycoon Adrian Wolfe set to marry former socialite Alara Quinn. Marcus didn't reach out. But his silence said enough. Adrian and I met again privately to discuss terms. He was precise. Contracts. Media coordination. Appearances. Public timeline. Everything down to the engagement ring was curated. You'll have full autonomy, he assured me, his voice clipped as he passed the documents across the table. This isn't a prison. But for the next 6 months, we are to appear in love. Convincing the world we're madly devoted to each other while we plot in the background. How romantic. He didn't smile. Adrian rarely did. We shook hands, and with that, our alliance began. The first event was a charity gala hosted by one of Marcus's board allies. Adrian made sure we were the center of attention. His hand rested lightly on my waist as we moved through the crowd, perfectly choreographed. I played the part effortlessly, smiling just enough, leaning in like I trusted him, brushing my fingers over his when the cameras lingered. Marcus watched from across the room, jaw clenched. The next day, his assistant reached out. Marcus wanted to meet. I see you're moving on, he said smoothly as we sat down at the rooftop bar he used to bring me to. Not moving. Evolving. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Adrian Wolfe, though? You really expect me to believe that's genuine? You didn't seem to care much about what I wanted when you tossed me aside for your father's political games. That was business, Alara. You knew that. And this is mine. He studied me like I was suddenly a threat instead of an afterthought. Careful who you tie yourself to. Wolfe isn't known for playing fair. I leaned forward, letting my voice drop just enough to make him listen. Neither am I. Leaving him there, alone, rattled, exposed, felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Adrian called me later that night. He's already moving to block one of our investment routes. Impressive. I didn't think he'd react so quickly. I smiled. He's not used to losing. Especially not to me. There was a pause. Then, Adrian said, "You looked good tonight." It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't compliment. It was observation. But it made my pulse skip all the same. Just playing my part, I said. And playing it well. Click. He ended the call without fanfare. It was nothing. Just business. A performance. A strategic alliance. But I found myself thinking about his hand on my back, the weight of it, the calm certainty he carried like a second skin. This wasn't supposed to be real. But something about the way he said my name made me wonder how long I'd be able to keep pretending. The ring Adrian gave me was sapphire, framed in platinum and subtle diamonds. A stone cold enough to match our arrangement. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sentimental. It was strategic. Unique enough to be noticed, expensive enough to silence doubters, but not flashy enough to look like a showpiece. Everything Adrian did had layers. And as I slid that ring on my finger before stepping out of the car into a wall of paparazzi, I realized I'd underestimated how thoroughly he planned everything. We were due to attend a weekend retreat in the countryside hosted by an elite investment firm. Marcus would be there. So would everyone who mattered in his world. The old money investors, the legacy CEOs, the kingmakers who once whispered in his favor. Adrian didn't just want to make a statement. He wanted to uproot Marcus from within his own network. "You'll be sleeping in the master wing with me," Adrian said bluntly as we entered the estate. "It's expected." "Expected by whom?" I raised an eyebrow. "The ones who matter." He paused just long enough to meet my eyes. "If this is going to work, we can't afford doubt." I nodded once. "Fine. Just keep your side of the bed cold." His mouth twitched like he wanted to smile but thought better of it. Inside, the estate was all polished oak, tall windows, and rooms that smelled like generational wealth. Adrian shook hands with every power player like he'd known them since birth. I watched him slip into the role of charming, measured heir with unsettling ease. At dinner, we sat at the head table. Marcus arrived late. Deliberately, I was sure. He greeted everyone else before acknowledging us. "Elara," he said smoothly, kissing my cheek. "Still as radiant as ever." "Marcus," I replied with equal calm. I didn't realize ghosts had such a strong perfume. The table laughed, and his jaw ticked. Adrian watched him like a hawk watches a wounded bird, curious whether it will limp or fly. Later that night, in the master suite, I dropped my heels and loosened my hair as Adrian poured 2 glasses of wine. "You play the game well," he said. "So do you." He handed me a glass. "I wasn't sure you'd be able to handle this level of pressure." "You mean being in a room with the man who threw me away like a used accessory?" I tilted my head. "Turns out, I'm quite good at pretending." He nodded once. "We both are." I stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was cool, laced with pine and firewood from the hearth below. Adrian joined me silently. "You ever get tired of playing the villain?" I asked. He took a sip of wine. "Villainy is relative. Marcus made me the enemy when I refused to sell out my company to his family's conglomerate. He wanted control. I wanted independence. Now we're here. And me? What role did I play in all of this?" He looked at me for a long time before answering. "A perfect move. Not a pawn. A queen." I didn't respond. But something about the way he said it, the conviction behind it, made me see myself a little differently. That night, we lay on opposite sides of the bed, a chasm of silence between us. But I wasn't thinking about Marcus. I was thinking about Adrian's words, about the way his voice shifted when he wasn't performing for others. In the morning, we emerged as a united front. Matching tones. Coordinated subtle gestures. To the public, we were the picture of balance and ambition. The whisper started almost immediately. "Did you see the way he looked at her? She softened him, haven't you noticed? I heard she turned down Marcus to be with him." Of course she did. Adrian is the real power now. It was intoxicating, how quickly the tide turned. The more we played our roles, the more people believed. And the more they believed, the more Adrian and I blurred the lines. One afternoon, during a luncheon, Marcus cornered me near the garden. "You think aligning with him will protect you? He'll use you up just like I did. Except he doesn't pretend to love me." His expression flickered. "I did love you. Right. Until your father decided I wasn't wife material." He stepped closer. "I made a mistake." "You did. And now I'm his fiancé." Marcus's eyes turned to steel. "He'll ruin you." I smiled coolly. "Let him try." Later that night, Adrian and I sat across from each other in the estate's drawing room, reviewing a spreadsheet on his tablet. But I wasn't focusing. I was still thinking about Marcus. His words. His desperation. "You're distracted," Adrian said without looking up. "Just thinking about how easily men fall apart when they lose what they thought they owned." His gaze lifted then. "You're not a trophy, Elara. Didn't stop Marcus from treating me like one." You were a threat to him the second you stopped needing him. His words hit harder than I expected. I stood and crossed to the fireplace, letting the warmth bathe my arms. This was supposed to be fake, I murmured. Adrian stood too, but didn't approach. It still is. Is it? He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, does it feel fake to you? The air between us shifted. Slower. Heavier. We weren't performing anymore. I turned toward him, searching his face for the mask he always wore. And for the first time, I couldn't find it. The flight back to the city was silent, but not cold. Adrian sat beside me in the jet, reviewing documents on his tablet, while I stared out the window at the clouds layered like silk sheets over the world below. We didn't need to speak. The tension between us wasn't bitter, it was dense with things unsaid, thoughts lingering just under the surface. I kept replaying his words in my head. Does it feel fake to you? He hadn't said it like a confession. He'd said it like a challenge. Like he already knew the answer and was daring me to lie. Back in the city, our faces were everywhere. Online headlines, fashion blogs, whispers in elevators. Power couple of the year. The tycoon and the comeback queen. Most of it made me laugh, but one article stuck in my mind. It featured a side-by-side photo, me on Adrian's arm, composed and radiant, and Marcus in a grainy shot, frowning as he left a private club. The headline read, Ex-fiancé's empire cracking? Inside the silent battle of Vale versus Wolf. Adrian had struck exactly where it would hurt Marcus most. Not through lawsuits or press attacks. Through symbolism. Through optics. He'd made me his equal, and in doing so, shown Marcus what it looked like to truly lose. We kept up appearances, parties, gallery openings, strategy meetings where our knees brushed under the table. The line between reality and performance blurred every time Adrian looked at me like I was the only person in the room. And I hated how my pulse reacted when he did. One night, he invited me to a dinner with a group of foreign investors. I wore a deep emerald dress, elegant and sharp, and when I stepped into his car, his eyes lingered just a second too long. You look, he started, then stopped. I look strategic, I offered with a smirk. He didn't argue. The dinner was flawless. He let me take the lead, knowing the investors were drawn to me. I spoke their language, figuratively and literally. I talked numbers, legacy, vision. Adrian watched silently, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass, not interrupting once. When the contracts were signed later that week, we'd secured a $60 million investment, and Marcus had just lost one of his oldest allies. We celebrated with a quiet drink in Adrian's penthouse, the city glittering beneath us like a map of stars. You were brilliant, he said, offering me a glass of bourbon. I was effective. He raised his glass in a toast. To effectiveness. We clinked glasses, and I sat on the arm of the sofa, toeing off my heels. This doesn't feel like fake anymore, I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me, glass still in hand. Which part? This. I gestured around. The way we move, the way they look at us. The way you look at me. He stood slowly, walked over, and stood directly in front of me. Not touching. Just close enough that I had to look up to meet his gaze. I look at you like that because I can't afford to look at anything else, he said. My throat dried. I thought this was about strategy, I whispered. It was. Was? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Before anything else could happen, before I could decide whether to step forward or pull away, my phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. Meet me. Alone. It's about Adrian. You deserve to know. Attached was a photo. Blurry. Grainy. Adrian sitting across from someone I didn't recognize in a quiet restaurant. A man with a face like a bruised memory. I looked closer. The timestamp was from 3 nights ago, the same night Adrian had told me he was meeting with legal. I didn't speak. I just stared. What is it? Adrian asked. I handed him the phone. He studied it for 3 seconds, then handed it back. He's digging. Who? Marcus. That man is an old associate of his. He's trying to plant doubts. Why didn't you tell me you were meeting him? I didn't think it mattered. It matters if you're hiding it. I'm not hiding. I'm protecting what we've built. I stood. You don't get to make that decision alone. His eyes narrowed. I make decisions based on logic. You know that. Then logically, you should have told me. The silence between us was sharper than any argument. Then he said, you're not just a pawn in this. You never were. I need to be sure of that. I left before he could say anything else. Back at my apartment, my real one, the one Adrian had never seen, I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The worst part wasn't the photo. It wasn't the secrecy. It was the gnawing feeling in my chest that this thing between us, this slow-burning, deliberate fire, was becoming something neither of us knew how to contain. The next morning, a package arrived. Inside was a manila folder. No name. No return address. Just one word on the tab, Wolf. Inside were documents. Bank transfers. Investment paths. Shell companies. And Marcus's name, tied to every last one. The final page was a note: he's not your enemy. But he's not innocent either. Decide what side you're really on. I didn't know who sent it. But I knew one thing with sickening clarity. This game was bigger than me. Bigger than Adrian. Bigger than revenge. It had always been war. And I'd just been promoted to general. I didn't sleep. I spent the entire night poring over the documents, cross-referencing bank records, piecing together the web they laid out. Whoever sent the folder wasn't just fishing for drama. They had access to high-level, confidential intel. The kind that could take down empires. The kind that could get someone killed. By dawn, I had 3 facts. First, Adrian had been making moves against Marcus long before I was in the picture. Second, Marcus had already tried to undermine Adrian's company through illegal fronts, but failed. And third, someone wanted me to believe Adrian was playing me the entire time. The problem was, I didn't know what to believe anymore. I cancelled the press shoot we were scheduled for that morning. Ignored Adrian's calls. I needed space to think. By noon, he showed up at my apartment. Not the penthouse. Not the corporate suite. My real home, the modest high-rise where the old version of me used to live before any of this started. He knocked, and I debated pretending I wasn't home. But Adrian Wolf wasn't the type to go away. I opened the door slowly. I figured this place still mattered to you, he said. Old habits. He didn't try to come in. He just stood in the hallway, staring at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. You got something in the mail, he said. I crossed my arms. Did you know what was in it? He hesitated. That pause told me everything. I knew Marcus was trying to dig into my accounts. But I didn't know he'd try to weaponize it against you. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat across from each other in the tiny living room I used to drink cheap wine in while dreaming of payback. I want the truth, I said. All of it. Adrian nodded once. Marcus's father tried to acquire my company 5 years ago. I refused. They blackballed me from every major investor circle. But I rebuilt. I diversified. And when I saw you with Marcus, I thought maybe you were just another piece in their long game. That's why you approached me. At first, yes. And now? He didn't blink. Now, I wouldn't have let them near you for any price. I swallowed the sharp knot in my throat. So this wasn't just about revenge? It started that way. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being about Marcus. I looked down at the ring still on my hand. The sapphire glinted in the morning light. I don't know what we are anymore, I said. He stood slowly, crossed the room, and crouched in front of me. We're 2 people who know exactly what betrayal feels like. 2 people who were underestimated. Who learned to weaponize it. I don't want to use you, Alara. I want to build something that scares every man who ever tried to silence us. It should have sounded like a pitch. But it didn't. It sounded like a promise. Still, I needed time. Space. Clarity. I need to handle something first. He didn't argue. He nodded, straightened, and left me alone with my thoughts. By the next day, I had a plan. If Marcus wanted a war, I'd give him one. I started small. Calling the investors he'd recently pitched to, offering them exclusive access to a new luxury property Adrian and I were backing. I didn't mention Marcus. I didn't have to. Our names alone were enough to make them hesitate. Then I went deeper. I met with a journalist. Not to expose Adrian, but to leak information about Marcus's offshore accounts. Just enough to rattle him. Just enough to make him paranoid. The story hit the internet like wildfire. Marcus Vale accused of tax fraud. Investors rattled, stocks dropped 17% overnight. I received a text from an unknown number. You've chosen your side. Smart move. The next morning, Marcus was waiting outside my office building. He looked tired. Rattled. You did this, he spat as I approached. I didn't deny it. You were nothing when I met you. I made you relevant. I smiled coldly. And now I'm your reckoning. He grabbed my wrist, desperate and angry. Do you honestly think Adrian cares about you? You're just a trophy to him. A weapon to parade around. I pulled my hand back, calm as stone. Funny. That's exactly how you treated me. The difference is, Adrian let me become more dangerous than you ever imagined. I walked away without looking back. Later that night, I stood in Adrian's penthouse again. He was by the window, watching the city burn in golden light. I heard about the leak, he said. Wasn't hard to tip the first domino. Marcus built his empire on lies. He turned. And us? I walked over slowly, stood in front of him. This was supposed to be a performance, I said. But now, I don't know how to fake it anymore. He didn't touch me. Just studied my face like he was memorizing the woman I'd become. I'm not asking you to love me, Alara, he said. But I'm asking you to stay. I reached up, removed the ring from my finger, and then slipped it back on. Then let's rewrite the script. And for the first time, when he kissed me, it wasn't for the cameras. It was for us. The moment our lips met, something shifted. This wasn't part of the arrangement. It wasn't for leverage, or headlines, or to tighten our grip on the narrative. It was raw. Real. And for the first time since all of this began, I let myself feel it. Adrian kissed me like he'd been holding back for months. Like every carefully crafted press appearance, every staged photo, every calculated glance had been a rehearsal for this moment. And when we finally pulled apart, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't before, vulnerability. Not weakness. Just the quiet kind of truth that only emerges when the masks drop. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. The next morning, we showed up to the office like nothing had changed. But something had. The tension between us wasn't strained anymore. It had melted into something electric, something patient. We still strategized, we still plotted, but now, the undertone was different. We were no longer acting like partners. We were becoming one. And that made us more dangerous. Together, we became a force. We released the first wave of our rebranding campaign, a luxury development project that directly challenged Marcus's flagship property. Ours had better investors, a more aggressive marketing plan, and, most importantly, the public's eye. The press couldn't get enough of us. The couple that rose from betrayal to power. The tycoon and the woman he built his empire beside. We weren't just front-page material. We were a brand. Marcus responded by leaking confidential documents he believed would embarrass Adrian. But he underestimated how far ahead we were. Before his leak even made it to publication, we countered with a detailed statement, complete with timestamps, legal clarifications, and a signed affidavit from one of his former employees who had defected to our side. The headline the next morning wasn't what he hoped for. Marcus Vale's desperation backfires. Wolf and Quinn silent scandal with proof and precision. I saw him that week at a gala we both were invited to. He was alone. His fiancée, one of his PR team's attempts to soften his image, had vanished from the public eye after our campaign launch. Rumor had it she didn't appreciate being compared to me in the media. I didn't blame her. Marcus had a habit of turning women into mirrors for his ego. When those mirrors cracked, he discarded them. He approached me near the terrace, the music from the ballroom fading behind us. You win, he said without preamble. I sipped my champagne. This wasn't a game. You just never learned how to play anything but one. He looked older somehow. Like the weight of his own collapse had finally started to show. I want to know something, he said. Did you ever love me? I could have lied. I could have told him what he wanted to hear, just to cut deeper. But I didn't need to anymore. I did, I said. But the version of me that loved you died the day you chose your father's approval over mine. He closed his eyes briefly. You know, I never thought you'd be the one to destroy me. That's the problem. You never thought I'd be anything at all. I walked away after that, and I didn't look back. Adrian was waiting for me by the bar. He didn't ask what Marcus said. He didn't need to. He just handed me a fresh glass and touched the small of my back, grounding me. We left early, not for show, not for optics, but because we didn't owe anyone our time anymore. In the weeks that followed, our project launched ahead of schedule. The numbers were better than forecasted. Adrian's net worth tripled. Mine wasn't far behind. People started referring to me not as his fiancé, but as his equal. Business journals profiled me. Financial analysts quoted me. I'd become the woman I used to fantasize about being when I cried in designer heels after Marcus left me for a merger. And yet, with every win, I stayed sharp. I never let comfort dull my edge. Because I knew this world. I'd seen what it did to women like me when they stopped being useful. Adrian understood that too. Which is why, one night over a quiet dinner at his private villa, he slid a new folder across the table. "I want to transfer ownership of 25% of the firm into your name," he said. I blinked. "That would make me co-founder." "You already are. This just makes it official." I stared at the papers. "You're really not afraid of me rising too high?" He leaned back, wine glass in hand. "Alara, I want you high enough that no one ever dares to look down on you again. Including me." I signed. Not because I needed his permission, but because it was the first time in my life that a man offered me power and didn't expect me to shrink under it. Later that night, when we lay together in bed, the moonlight tracing the edges of our limbs, I asked the question that had been haunting me for weeks. What happens when there's no one left to destroy? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to me, brushed my hair behind my ear. "Then we build." It was the simplest answer. But it was also the one I'd never been given before. For the first time, revenge wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. The firm was renamed Wolf & Quinn Global. Our logo was etched in brushed steel across the skyline, stamped on every press release, and whispered about in boardrooms as the new definition of power. At first, people assumed the rebrand was symbolic, a nod to our engagement, a vanity move for PR. But when I took the stage at our global summit and outlined our 5-year acquisition strategy, there was no room left for doubt. I wasn't his ornament. I was his equal. And people were starting to realize I might be even more dangerous than Adrian. I had access now, to deals, assets, people who once never returned my calls. CEOs who dismissed me when I was Marcus's arm candy now asked for meetings. Their tone had changed. Their posture too. I saw it in the way they leaned in the way they nodded faster when I spoke. Fear dressed as respect. I welcomed it. Adrian and I worked in sync. We rarely needed to explain ourselves anymore. A glance during a board meeting. A note passed under a glass. Our minds had become mirrors, sharpened over months of strategy, sacrifice, and shared ambition. But beneath the surface, something softer was growing. I didn't want to admit it. Not to myself. Not to him. But I felt it in the quiet moments. When he walked into a room and my pulse skipped. When he murmured ideas to me before sleep and I found myself smiling in the dark. When I caught him watching me not like a partner, but like a man in awe. I hadn't planned for that. And I didn't know what to do with it. Especially when the past started knocking. A letter arrived. Hand-delivered. No return address. Inside was a wedding invitation. Marcus was getting married. Again. To someone younger, blonder, blank as paper. But that wasn't the insult. The insult was that the wedding was being hosted at the estate Adrian and I had just acquired last quarter, a historic landmark we'd publicly announced we were turning into a luxury retreat. He was mocking us. Or daring us. Maybe both. I stared at the invitation for a long time before sliding it across Adrian's desk. He glanced at it. Bold. He wants to provoke us. Then let's give him what he's asking for. I looked up. You want to go? Adrian leaned back, considering. Not as guests. As owners. The idea unfolded between us like a perfectly cut diamond. We wouldn't crash the wedding. We'd reclaim the space. We'd remind everyone, especially Marcus, who held the keys now. The days leading up to the wedding were surgical. Adrian coordinated with legal to ensure our rights as property owners were visible but non-obstructive. I worked with PR to arrange a carefully timed magazine feature set to publish the same morning the ceremony began. The headline read, "From X to Empire, Alara Quinn rewrites the rules of power. We arrived early." Adrian in a charcoal suit that made silence look lethal. Me in a deep red gown that wasn't just elegant, it was a declaration. I knew how I looked. I intended every detail. The guests whispered as we walked in. Some tried to pretend they weren't watching. Others didn't bother. Marcus's new bride, porcelain and unsure, looked like a placeholder. Marcus found us during the cocktail hour. "I suppose you think this is clever," he said under his breath. Adrian sipped his drink. "I think it's poetic." Marcus turned to me. "You really want to humiliate me like this?" "I'm not humiliating you," I said calmly. "You're doing that all on your own." His jaw flexed. "You're obsessed with tearing me down." I smiled. "No, Marcus. I just finally learned how to build something without you in it." We walked away before he could reply. That night, Adrian and I stood on the balcony of the estate's highest room, the same one Marcus used to claim as his own during business retreats. The ballroom below buzzed with hollow laughter. We were above it all. Literally. Figuratively. Do you regret it? Adrian asked. Any of it? I thought about that. About the girl I used to be. About the heartbreak that led me here. About the hunger that built a dynasty. No, I said. I regret not doing it sooner. He turned toward me. I'd built a lot of things in my life. Companies. Wealth. Reputation. But none of it felt solid until you stood beside me. My breath caught. You know this was supposed to be fake, I said, voice barely a whisper. I know. And yet, he repeated, stepping closer. I don't think I'm faking it anymore. You're not. He took my hand. Slowly. Carefully. Like he was still afraid I'd run. Like he understood that even now, I held the power to walk away. But I didn't. I leaned into him. Because somewhere along the line, I stopped chasing revenge. And started building a future. With the one man my past could never touch. The morning after Marcus's wedding, the media descended like hawks. Not on the bride. Not on the ceremony. But on us. Photos of Adrian and me standing above the ballroom, the estate glowing behind us like we were royalty surveying a kingdom, went viral before sunrise. She stole the venue, the press, and the spotlight, one outlet wrote. Another simply headlined, the real power couple of the century doesn't need a vow to dominate. And beneath every headline, every repost, every whispered conversation, was one unshakable truth. Marcus Vail was finished. The board of his father's conglomerate had already begun a quiet vote of no confidence. Investors were withdrawing support. The merger he'd gambled everything on was dissolving. His name no longer carried weight. It carried warning. Meanwhile, Adrian and I weren't just rising, we were accelerating. We expanded into tech. Acquired a boutique AI firm in Paris. Launched a philanthropic wing focused on rebuilding education infrastructure in overlooked cities. Every move was both benevolent and brutal. We built smarter. Faster. Cleaner. And every headline that mentioned our rise also whispered his fall. But I wasn't thinking about Marcus anymore. Not really. Because something had changed between Adrian and me after that night on the balcony. The way we looked at each other. Touched each other. It wasn't performance. It wasn't part of the script. It was something real, something steady. We still hadn't said it. Those words people throw around too easily. But it was there. In how he waited for me to finish my thoughts in meetings, even when I went off script. In how I started leaving a coffee on his desk just the way he liked it, dark, no sugar, 1 cube of ice to take the edge off. There was comfort now. And then, out of nowhere, a storm hit. It came in the form of a legal summons. Wolf and Quinn was being sued for breach of contract by a company we'd never even dealt with. On paper, it looked ridiculous. But the deeper we looked, the more tangled it became. Shell corporations. Fake board members. Loopholes twisted into traps. I sat across from our legal counsel in stunned silence. Someone planned this, I said. Months ago. Years, Adrian corrected, his voice steel. He handed me a file. Inside were photocopied documents, emails, contracts, and signatures from the early days of his company. Before me. Before us. I should have caught it back then, he said, jaw clenched. I was too focused on surviving Marcus's moves to see what was festering under the surface. The case wasn't designed to win. It was designed to distract. To freeze assets. To force public doubt. And the worst part? It was working. Shareholders were getting nervous. Editorials were shifting tone. Our competitors were circling like vultures. We're not going to survive this if we just play defense, I said. Then we don't. Adrian looked up at me. We hit back. Hard. And just like that, the gloves came off. I called in favors. Whispered to reporters. Leaked just enough truth to destabilize the ones behind the lawsuit. And when that didn't work fast enough, I did something I hadn't done since the very beginning. I visited Marcus. His penthouse was dim. The once golden man was now a hollow silhouette, nursing a glass of something expensive he could no longer afford. Come to gloat, he asked without looking at me. Come to make a deal. That got his attention. You know who's behind this, I said. And I know you do because you're petty, but you're not subtle. This isn't your style. He laughed bitterly. You think I'd help you after everything? I think you're tired of losing. He didn't answer. So I left him with a name. And a choice. 2 days later, evidence started flooding in. Anonymous tips. Confidential files. Internal memos. Whoever was coming after us didn't expect Marcus to flip. But he did. Maybe out of spite. Maybe out of self-preservation. But I didn't care. We built our countercase with speed and precision. Adrian called it a purge. I called it payback. Within weeks, the lawsuit collapsed. Public opinion boomeranged. The stock soared. And the once unknown firm that tried to bury us? Exposed. Dissolved. Forgotten. The day we won, Adrian and I sat on the rooftop of our latest property, overlooking the skyline we now practically owned. You didn't flinch, he said, pouring us both a drink. I don't flinch for ghosts, I replied. He smiled, that rare, quiet smile I'd come to treasure. You know, he said slowly, I never expected this. What? The lawsuits? The power plays? He shook his head. You. I looked at him. What about me? I thought I was just pulling a weapon out of Marcus's arsenal. But you, Alara, you became something more than I ever imagined. You didn't just help me win. You made me better. For once, I didn't deflect. I didn't joke. I just reached for his hand. Because he wasn't the only one who never expected this. I thought I was agreeing to a business arrangement. But somewhere along the line, amidst the power, the revenge, the victory, I found something that felt a lot like home. And I wasn't ready to let it go. The night Wolf and Quinn celebrated its 5th acquisition in 3 months, we threw a gala in the heart of the city. Not for publicity. Not for investors. Just for us. To mark the turning point, to acknowledge that we hadn't just survived the war. We'd won it. The ballroom shimmered with elegance, crystal chandeliers overhead, live cello music weaving through the air, and every guest dressed like they belonged to an empire. Ours. I wore silver that night. Not red, not black, not the calculated tones of vengeance. Silver. Sharp, clean, unmistakably untouchable. Adrian's eyes found me the second I walked in. He said nothing, just extended his hand and led me to the center of the room. When we danced, the crowd faded. His hand on my waist. The curve of his palm against mine. The weight of everything we'd been through, the lies, the pretending, the burn of ambition and the quiet ache of becoming more than we were allowed to be, pressed between us. I used to think love would slow me down, I said softly as we turned under the lights. He didn't miss a beat. It does. But it makes the climb worth it. It wasn't a declaration. It was the truth. And for 2 people who built a dynasty out of silence and strategy, the truth was the rarest currency we had. After midnight, when the guests had thinned and the cameras had vanished, we found ourselves on the rooftop again. Always the rooftops. Where the air was still and the world looked small beneath our feet. I've been thinking, he said, hands resting on the railing. That's dangerous, I teased, even though my heart was already racing. I meant what I said in Paris. You're not a partner in this. You are this. I turned toward him. The city lights reflected in his eyes. For once, there was no armor between us. No headlines. No leverage. Just him and me. I don't need a title to know who I am, I said quietly. I don't need a ring to stay. He nodded slowly. I know. Then he reached into his pocket. Not for a ring. For a key. He placed it in my hand. It's not symbolic. It's real. The entire top floor of the tower. Yours. You can turn it into a second office. A gallery. A fortress. I don't care. But I want you to know, this isn't a chapter. You're not passing through. You built this. I closed my fingers around the key. It was cool and solid and heavy with promise. I'm not going anywhere, I said. And I meant it. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. That chapter had ended the moment Marcus realized I'd become something he could never reach again. Something he couldn't ruin. Couldn't manipulate. Couldn't unmake. This was about legacy. The life we built after the fire. The kingdom we carved from the ashes. Not with fairy tale endings, but with precision. With grit. With unrelenting loyalty to ourselves and each other. Weeks passed. The world moved on. Marcus's name disappeared from the headlines. Wolf and Quinn became the new standard. The empire others studied. Feared. I traveled more, spoke on panels, signed books, funded scholarships for girls who reminded me of who I used to be. Adrian expanded into tech innovation and environmental architecture. Our days were full, but our nights were ours. And one morning, without ceremony, without a grand speech or staged photos, I looked at him across the kitchen island and said, "I love you." He didn't flinch. Didn't smile. He stepped around the counter, took my face in both hands, and said, "Then stay." So I did. I stayed not because I had to. Not because the plan demanded it. But because somewhere in the quiet, calculated rise of our power, we became more than enemies of the past. We became each other's future. And when the history books write about the fall of Marcus Vale and the rise of Wolf and Quinn, they'll get the headlines wrong. They'll say it started with strategy. But really, it started the moment I chose myself. And ended when I chose him too.